Do you enjoy listening to podcasts and think, man, I would like to make my own podcast? This is where I found myself last year, and I have learned a lot about what to do and a lot about what not to do. I'm offering consulting services to help you launch your podcast, especially if you're looking to make a more Christian or conservative based podcast. Find out more information at faithfullyengaged.com. I have a link down in the description below if you would like help on getting your podcast started. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Faithfully Engaged. Today, my guest's name is Eleanor Clark, and she is one of the several guests that I've met just out in the wild on social media. Us counselors out there with a certain value system, we can kind of see it. We know what it looks like when we see similar beliefs out there in the wild like that. So I'm super glad to run into Eleanor. So Eleanor, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, like I said before we started recording, I'm really excited to be on this podcast because I've been listening to it for the last few months, ever since I kind of met you, quote unquote, on Instagram and then Facebook. But yeah, my name's Eleanor Clark. I am a private practice eating disorder therapist in Indiana. I live in the Indianapolis area. I started my career with eating disorders at a treatment center. So my first experience was with inpatient, residential, and then partial hospitalization levels of care, doing like everything from like individual work and body image work to group work and family sessions and stuff like that. And then joined a group practice for a couple of years doing outpatient eating disorder work. And now I'm running my own practice doing mostly eating disorder work. Other stuff slips in there too, but mostly eating disorder stuff. I do a combination of telehealth and in person, and then also do a little bit of therapy groups, which I love so much. That's probably what I miss most about the doing higher level of care work is the groups. So that's something that's been really fun about being on my own. I wrote a book called Body Neutrality a couple years ago, kind of about my approach to body image, and recently started a podcast called The Dissenting Therapist, where I talk about some stuff that relates to mental health and kind of some hot button issues in our field right now.
Fantastic. So lots of good things in there, and I know some of the audience are fellow therapists, that like you and I are, and many that are listening are not. But I always get interested when I'm interviewing another counselor, and especially when they get into some of their specialties. So body image and eating disorders, that's a fairly well known issue in our culture. I'm curious for you, what got you interested in serving that population?
Yeah, I got interested because I struggle. Most eating disorder therapists have this answer. I struggled with an eating disorder throughout my childhood and was super fortunate to get to go to treatment during high school before I went to college. And I wouldn't say that's fully when my great recovery started, but it's when I at least got kind of a stable foundation of recovery under my belt and was able to really be present and have a great college experience because of that foundation. And I'd say kind of along the line of realizing everything that's more important than than food and body image. When I started like dating my husband and seeing, like how great friendships could be, is when I realized how silly it was, my obsession with things around my body and food, and was able to actually fully embrace recovery at that time. And when I had been recovered for a little while, like in a pretty great recovery for a while, is when I actually started working at that treatment center as just a technician during my senior year of college. And then I continued working there during graduate school. They were amazing at providing opportunities for me to keep learning and keep growing in my career while I was still in school. So I got kind of some unique opportunities there to run groups and things like that before I was a technical therapist. So I had my personal experience, and then the treatment center just gave me so much of a great education and passion for eating disorders, because I kind of went into it honestly a little bit, I think, arrogant that I knew so much about eating disorders, having had one myself and was so interested in disordered eating. I had read so much about it. I really felt like I knew what to expect from that job. And I remember my first day as a technician being so blown away by how much I did not know about eating disorders and how much variety there is. Most of them don't look like mine. Like everyone's eating disorder is different. You have to really get to know the person to get to know their eating disorder. And also just the severity of just how life-wrecking the eating disorder could be. Even though it had wrecked my life, it was still shocking to me to see how devastating they could be in other people's lives too. So that's my passion came from my personal experience, but the experience of going to college a few minutes away from like a great treatment center was also a huge part of that growing passion of mine.
Yeah. No, it's always interesting for me to, like I said, just hear those stories. Everybody has a why, and obviously yours is a pretty personal one. But I
Yeah.
love the part where you mentioned almost kind of this arrogance there of like, oh, I've lived it, so I've got it all
Yeah.
figured out. And I think that takes some humility to admit that
I wouldn't have
no,
admitted it
I
at the
didn't.
time. Yeah, I wouldn't have admitted that then. It was years later that I was like, oh my goodness, I thought I knew so much and I knew nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really interested in your book of body neutrality. And that's something that, again, those of you listening, you might have heard this concept. I know in our field, like I've really been inundated with this, that the term you hear more often is body positivity.
Yeah.
And that sounds all nice. I mean, it's positive. So why body neutrality? Why that title?
No, I love talking about this. I was in those like naive years of learning about how to treat eating disorders and starting to do groups and stuff. Um, a lot of the girls would request body image groups because that's frankly that's statistically why most people relapse. That's even though it's not, we always say it's not about your body. The body is what got you a little bit fascinated with these behaviors and with the world of eating disorders. So it's super relevant to recovery, even if it's not about your body. And when I was first like trying to explore how to treat body image, body positivity was like the big fad of the time because it was, I don't know, this was about like 2017, 2018. And it was really exploding on Instagram, especially, and like Tumblr and stuff around that time. So all of the materials, curriculum, everything for body image was mostly based on that. Um, I'd say with a few exceptions that were kind of niche, like everything was about body positivity. And so I just kind of went with it and used that stuff and kind of used that inspiration, and it just wasn't helping anybody. And the more we'd talk about it and like we'd have like honest processing and reflection among the groups about it, I'd hear more and more that this is just, I can't relate to this because I don't believe it. I feel like a hypocrite to say I love my body and all bodies are beautiful and all bodies are great when I don't believe that. I don't believe that about myself. I don't believe that about others. When people would start to get honest, it's like, I'm not just judging my own body. Like when you're struggling with an eating disorder, you're not yourself. You don't look at others the same way. You don't look at yourself the same way. So this like ultra positive, all bodies are beautiful kind of approach. It's like a fairy tale approach to something that's really dark and it's not helpful. It's also not sustainable to get to a place like that. And I think what a lot of the girls found is it gave them one more thing to feel guilty about. Like, not only do I hate my body and I know that's wrong, I know that I shouldn't feel that way, but also like I'm trying to pretend that I feel a way about it that I don't. So when I did a little more research about it, I think it was on Instagram actually that I came across the term body neutrality and started exploring it. There's a lot more now than there was when I first started exploring it. So I had to kind of build a curriculum about it. And I think I did like a 10-week kind of approach to body neutrality. And we started developing a lot of activities around it and processing questions and things like that. That was helpful. That was actually something that was getting us somewhere because we could be honest about the fact that even in phenomenal recovery, it's okay to have days where you're just like not in love with your body because frankly that's just not what life is about, is loving your body. Like you can have a very fulfilling life and not be obsessed with how hot you are. Like that's completely possible. And that's not actually, going to be the end all be all of your happiness and joy is finding yourself attractive. But instead, if we are able to prioritize what does really matter in my life, what is really important to me, and then decrease the significance of your body, while acknowledging its goodness and the fact that like it was made by a creator intentionally, and seeing the purpose in that and the higher purpose in that, then we can actually get to a place where we have a sustainable approach to our bodies, that even as they change, even as they age, we can have a sustainable perspective of them. And something that was, I think, hard for some of the clients, and we'd have clients that, relapsed and came back a couple times. One thing that was kind of hard is, I might leave treatment and I kind of like my body to a degree, like it's culturally accepted, I feel decently good in it. And then maybe it changes a little more over the next few months after they get home, and all of a sudden they realize all of their body image was based on a conditional appearance of their bodies. So when it changed, it was no longer acceptable, and the eating disorder was again very attractive. So when body image is based on actually finding your body attractive, there's a little bit of conditional danger to that. That's not sustainable. Versus body neutrality, that's something I've been able to maintain through pregnancy, through postpartum. My body can change and I can still accept it and appreciate it and respect it. Even if I can acknowledge that, like, sometimes it's not, it's like peak attractiveness, but that doesn't matter because it's something that has been an amazing part of my life. It's been a vessel for me to have a wonderful life. So I can appreciate it and respect it despite not always having this opinion of it being beautiful and stunning, if that makes sense. It's still worthy of dignity and respect.
No, I think that makes complete sense. And those that have heard, yeah, we need to love our bodies and things like that. I think you're really parsing this out well there, that it sounds good on the surface. Again, positive thinking,
Mm-hmm.
body positive. Goodness, another term out there is sex positive.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is good, positive,
Yes.
happy.
Yes.
And there's some of that is good. Like there's good parts of everybody's body out there that we should celebrate. I mean, goodness, we get up and I I just worked out the other day, and I had to get up off the couch after leg day, and my legs weren't working well. And
Right.
I was really appreciative of the days that I wasn't sore and my legs worked well. Um,
Yes.
and I don't think about that, but that's a good thing about my body, that I can get up and walk
Yeah.
on most days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's positive things out there, but it's not realistic, like you're saying, for me
It's
to
not.
think that things are just great
No.
all the time. And I see this not somewhat in my counseling practice, but more just in the culture, that we celebrate everything.
Yeah.
So with body positivity, if somebody is 200 pounds overweight, we're supposed to say that that's healthy, and it's not. Same thing if somebody is 50 pounds underweight, that's not healthy either. So
Yeah.
we're not looking at reality, and there's a way to share reality in a loving, respectful way. We don't have to be jerks about it, but
No.
we need to be truthful. And like you're saying, the people themselves that are struggling with it, they can't put on that facade forever either.
No, they can't. And I think that was another thing that I like, my arrogance prevented me from thinking that other people had worse body image than I did, because when I had such bad body image looking back, I was like, there's no way someone felt worse than that, because that was just the most horrible experience of my life, was feeling like that in my body. And no, these were people that I could not even wrap my brain around the lengths they were willing to go to, feeling so uncomfortable in their skin. This is not someone that's going to, just because you said her body is beautiful, immediately give up the eating disorder because you're right, my body is beautiful. Why am I doing this? That's not, and that's ultimately too, it's a fake solution, because again, the problem's not your body. So if we're trying to solve the problem by saying, but your body's perfect, there's nothing wrong with your body, all bodies are great, that's not solving the problem. The problem is that we don't have an identity outside of the eating disorder, or we don't see value in ourselves outside of our appearance, or there's trauma, or something has made my body feel very unsafe and foreign, and it feels safer when I'm doing these things. So for me to walk up and slap you with, like, your body's beautiful, is a fake solution. It's not a real solution to the problem anyway. So not only is it minimizing of the pain they're going through, to just try to say these things that they don't believe, that they're not going to believe for probably, for years, is how long it takes to get a healthier body image. They're not going to, in 4 to 6 weeks while they're in treatment, start all of a sudden having a body positive approach because I'm saying it to them. They have to start maybe uprooting the way they've approached body image altogether, which is they live in a culture that emphasizes their body image and emphasizes thinness above everything and emphasizes dieting and self control around food feels like a moral goodness in our culture. So they're going to have to uproot how they approach those things and how they see their body as a worthy being just because God created it rather than something that has to earn value with an appearance. So body positivity is kind of the same problem. Like we're too obsessed with the body. We're too focused on it in an eating disorder. And our solution is to, again, just be focused on it and obsessed on it, but in a more positive way. Like that's the same problem. So body neutrality it was like something that you kind of, the concept makes perfect sense. It was just not something that I had heard someone put a language to before that. So I totally took that and ran with it. I was obsessed with the concept of body neutrality after that. And that's persisted for me. Years later, that's something that I still use with all of my clients. It's still sustainable. It's still been sustainable for me. It's kind of been one of those life-changing approaches to how you perceive your body.
Yeah. Well, and it centers back in to truth. That this
Yeah.
is something that I emphasize with clients all the time, no matter what the issue is. Some recent things I've discussed often is some emotions like guilt and shame. They tend to get a little bit of a bad rap that we don't want to live in guilt and shame, and that's
They can
how
be
I
productive.
identify everything, but they can be
Yeah.
productive. Exactly. My wife a bad name or something and I feel guilty about it. That's a good thing. That brings
That's a good thing.
reconciliation. I
Yeah.
apologize. I was wrong. And with our bodies, if something is wrong, then that's okay. We need to be able to maybe I do need to be able to work out a little bit more, something like that, to make things better. Maybe I do need to eat more or whatever it may be. But yeah, it's not this
Yeah.
big moral concern. It's a health issue, and it takes some of the
Mhm.
pressure off of things that I don't have to be perfect.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of what you're talking about with the guilt and shame. That's something that kind of forgot about this, but it came up a lot in some of those groups as well. Is trying to distinguish between false guilt and real guilt because in an eating disorder, there's guilt about everything. Like every single thing you do. Just choosing recovery feels like a morally bad thing, and I think it's kind of. I feel like eating disorders. I've tried to think of if any other disorder kind of makes you feel like this. I believe eating disorders are the only disorder where choosing to get better feels like the wrong thing. It feels like morally I'm making a bad choice to try to get better from this because the eating disorder feels like a moral goodness. It feels like self control and discipline for a lot of people, not for everyone. It depends on the eating disorder. I don't think anyone with RFID feels like that, but a lot of people with anorexia and bulimia can't imagine letting go of that eating disorder. That feels like the wrong thing, or it feels like letting themselves go or losing their discipline. So you have to kind of like accept that you're probably during like all moments of your life in the beginning of recovery going to feel wrong and guilty, and you have to decide like which one feels appropriately guilty. Like when I had lapses in my recovery, I felt guilty. That was more of an appropriate guilt of kind of bringing me an awareness of like that's because I'm not living consistently with my values. It's because I'm not living
Hmm.
consistently with my long term goals for my life. Guilt makes sense here. I'm not going to live in it. I'm not going to get obsessed in it or drown in it. But I'm going to acknowledge that this guilt kind of makes sense. When I feel guilty because I did not throw up, or I feel guilty because I did eat my lunch, that's false guilt. And that's really
Hmm.
hard to distinguish for someone who literally feels guilty for every single choice they're making around food, around movement. All of that is going to feel like I did something wrong for probably weeks to months of recovery. So, learning to understand when I'm living in my values, that's probably false guilt. And when I'm not living in my values, that's probably genuine guilt. And how can I make it productive? How can I make it change or apologize or do the thing that I need to do? And that I think resonated with a lot of people, and me included, because like I said, I don't think there's another mental illness where choosing recovery feels like a bad choice.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and you bring up really the key word in this is your values. And I'm pretty open on my podcast, and then even in my Christian counseling practice, about where my values come from. I believe that they come that we're inherently given value just because we're made in God's image, and I think that holds incredible value. And I know not all of the clients that we work with will operate from a Christian worldview, but one of the great things about Christianity is it's pretty self-explanatory of, again, where those values come from. And it's not about the things that we do or that we earn. It's because we were made, because of whose image we were made, and it takes that pressure off. And whether they're Christian or not, if you don't know why your life matters, what your values are, you're not going to have a compass to say if this is true or false guilt. It's
You've got
just
to establish
all
that.
guilt is bad.
Yeah, yeah, you're just going to feel uncomfortable and wonder where you're going with no compass all the time if you don't have a set of values to operate from when you approach something like recovery. Absolutely couldn't agree more with that.
Well, let's get a little bit into kind of this newer phase of your life, of your podcast, and just stepping out a little bit into, like we're talking off air just a little bit, of things that don't seem to really be that controversial. At least they shouldn't be, but in our field and in our culture, they are. So just tell me a little bit about your process and why you've kind of decided to take a step out there a little bit.
Yeah, I so the first episode of my podcast was about gender affirming care in minors, and it got a lot of attention. It got a lot of negative attention. It also got a lot of positive attention, actually. And I kind of feel like that's important to talk about too, because I think when I posted it, all my friends were kind of like, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna get so much hate for that," and that wasn't totally wrong. Like, I did shocked by how much support and how many therapists and dietitians for me work very closely alongside therapists. So therapists and dietitians that reached out, and people I hadn't talked to maybe for years texted me, called me, and said they were so thankful that, like, to know that another clinician felt that way. And I think that's important to say, because I think we all feel so alone in the way that we
Mm-hmm.
feel towards these issues. I haven't even said on here right now what my take is. You can probably guess, though, that I was very against gender affirming care in minors. And I think we all assume that every single therapist, especially therapist, is going to only be in support of gender affirming care. And they probably would say, especially in minors, because of the stats we hear about suicide rates, and because of the fear mongering that a lot of people have used to make us feel that that's literally no matter how you apply logic or how you apply other forms of research that are maybe a little more credible, that this is the only way we can approach these things right now. So I think a lot of clinicians that question that or think that doesn't make sense, kind of like I did, feel very alone. And I felt so alone in those thoughts. And I remember, for me, kind of that moment, I've always had these opinions, I've always had these thoughts. But the moment where it was like, this is ridiculous, was when the American Academy of Pediatrics came out, and they were talking about recommending bariatric surgery and other weight loss like procedures and medications for kids as young as 13, which I don't support. I think that's crazy. I've seen adults have like life suffering consequences from these surgeries, so I can't imagine doing that to children. But this is exactly what we were doing in kids. We've been doing that for years to kids when it comes to gender affirming care, just under a different title. And there was actually one time I brought that up in a group of therapists, and as soon as I said that, the room just got quiet. Like, no one said anything. But afterward, like privately afterwards, people were like, "I totally agree with you. That doesn't make sense." But it was something that no one would say in a group, and that's kind of been the theme of even this podcast. Is the criticism I've gotten has all been public. The criticism has all been like comments and things like that. The praise has all been private. I think a lot of people are very scared to say even that, "I think this makes sense," or "I'm glad you said this," because of how it's going to reflect on their license. I think for some, it's not even just afraid of how they're going to be perceived. I think people genuinely have a concern about their license when it comes to saying these things. And I think going into now being self-employed, I just kind of felt like, why am I still like not saying anything about it? I know we're all in agreement. I know a lot of us feel this way. I don't have anyone over me saying I can't say it or that I'm representing them anymore. So it kind of just felt like the time to just start saying it. And my hope is that even if it's just local, like people around me around here start to feel a little more comfortable talking about it, even if it's just with me, that would start maybe a little bit of a movement away from just assuming all therapists have this
Mm.
one approach to this issue. And of course, I have these unpopular opinions about other things too, but this is the one that got the most attention.
Well, and for good reason. It's one just hot pressing.
Yeah,
It's kind of at the apex right now. Although I'm optimistic that it seems to be more on the downside.
yeah,
See England dropping some puberty
yep,
blockers and things like that. So
yep.
there's good news coming along. But regardless, it's extremely polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot find a mainline counseling organization that is not in support of gender affirming care. It's
Yep.
everywhere, short of some Christian counseling organizations out
Yes,
there. But
yes.
it,
More niche groups are all you're going to
y-
find. Yeah,
yes, all the big ones, APA, all that, they're all in on it. So there is pressure,
yeah,
and I think what you are really hammering out here, Ellie, is big, whether you're a counselor or not. Counselors, we do face a little bit of a different challenge. Livelihoods are, I mean, quite frankly, they are on the line. So
yeah,
there's some of that fear is legitimate. Um, but even if you're not a counselor, even if you're just at the water cooler and people are talking about whatever, or you're at a work conference and everybody has to go around and share their pronouns or just things of that nature. If you don't comply, a couple things are going to happen. One, you'll probably be the only one that does that
yeah.
up front. There probably won't be someone else that starts before you. That much is
No,
true.
yeah,
But two, what Elliot said, you're either going to have somebody publicly support you, maybe, but you'll definitely have somebody privately support you.
yeah,
And
mm-hmm.
the great thing about that is they may become the next public person.
Yes,
And that courageousness spreads. And like you were saying, it matters even if it's just in your community.
yeah,
I've had people reach out to me. It's actually one of my favorite parts of my private practice that I've had people reach out to me that they're in states I'm not licensed in, and I don't even serve them, but I connect them with somebody else.
yeah.
And they say, I didn't trust anybody else. I'm afraid they're going to push this on my kids. Can you find me somebody that will treat my kid that's not going to push that on them? And I
Oh,
love that.
100%. Yeah.
I don't even see a dime from them, but I love getting to connect people in that way. So some of how they found me is either by my podcast or a blog post I made. You don't know the impact you can make
Right.
just by standing on truth. It is
Well, and I,
absolutely worth it.
I want to say that's kind of where, I got my courage was from watching. I feel like there haven't been many therapists that do that, but we've even talked about some of the ones that we know. The ones who were willing to kind of do that first, I can't even begin to admire their courage because I'm not the first one. There were people that had to do this that did not know if anyone else was going to support them
Mm-hmm.
or did not know if anyone else was going to agree with them, and I admire them deeply. And when I started seeing some documentaries and see, oh my gosh, there were two therapists that were interviewed in that documentary. That means there are two therapists at least who are willing to, and they even talked about it in the documentary. Like, I can't talk about this with peers. This is something that is not welcome, and I feel very alone. And yet they were willing to go on a documentary and talk about it. That's amazing, and it gave me courage to think I'm not alone here. There are well-known people in this field that are seeing problems with this approach to healthcare. Um, I think that you probably don't have any idea the impact you would make just by being a little bit bold, even in like I'm talking about, even in a little meeting that might have 5 people in it. Someone feeling like, oh, thank goodness there's someone else here. that feels that way. That's what made me really close with a coworker, was us realizing we actually aligned on this. She's not as public about it, but she is really someone that I rely on and talk to a lot about these issues, because I trust her judgment and her approach that's still evidence based, that's still ethical, that I can trust where she's coming from and where she's landing on some of these tough issues. And the more I've talked about it, the more therapists I have found that are they've been open about this. They just don't have, like, they might be older therapists, or they might be established enough that they don't have social media. So they're just not necessarily, they would be open if that was a platform that they had. That's just kind of before their time. But there are people that have thriving practices that just have had kind of a grassroots approach to this for years. You are far from alone with those beliefs if you're listening today, and that's something that you're kind of walking through right now. If you have some boldness, just sometimes you're going to be shocked by how many people you come across that have the same concerns and also feel alone in them.
Yes, absolutely. That's something I've harped on, that no matter what the topic is, if it's gender affirming care or just sticking for your values, wherever you may be, it takes just tiny steps, little steps. And again, it's not about what may be. I don't know what may be. I don't set off camera. I don't know if I'll lose my license one day. I don't know,
Yeah,
but I know what a boy and a girl is. Like that
yeah,
that's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm willing to risk things for that. And that's
yeah,
another encouragement that I will have to anybody, now, whether you're a counselor or stay-home mom or whoever you are, that take steps now to try to prevent catastrophe. If you're working for somebody that their values are directly opposite of your own, that I'm not saying to quit your job right that very second, but take steps. Is there another job you can look at? Are there ways that you can get some side income? You don't want to be beholden to somebody that is directly opposed to your values. And I know uh, Ellie and I have been like we're both self-employed, so we have a little bit more freedom.
yeah.
But we didn't just wake up one day and we're self-employed. Like
Right.
it takes
Process.
steps out there to do it. And again, you don't even have to be self-employed. You could be in a group practice or some other employer that more aligns with your values. But don't rely on people that hate your values to not fire you.
Yeah,
It's just not a good strategy. And don't wait for that big moment. Start now, and you're going to be much prepared, and it'll be much easier for you to be courageous.
fully agree with that. Yeah, I think that's something that made self-employment feel so attractive. Obviously there's lots of reasons self-employment is very attractive, but that is absolutely one of the top ones, is you have freedom to speak out. Again, you're not fully, you still need a license, you still need those kind of ethical, those things are necessary. um, but for the most part you have much more freedom than you would working for someone else.
Yeah.
So um, huge attractive factor there, if it's possible for someone that might be considering whether or not that's kind of their route. That's not even the only perk. There's a thousand of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think the audience has gleaned a lot from just your courageousness of your own story of stepping out and sharing more about kind of your thoughts on some hot topic issues, and also sharing about body neutrality. I think that's just such a wonderful topic that those of you listening, maybe you don't struggle with eating disorder, maybe you struggle with body image issues, and I about guarantee you know somebody that struggles with body image issues at some level. So for those that are listening that want to either get the book or to listen to your podcast, just talk to you after the show, how can they be in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have links to everything on my Instagram, which is at Eleanor Clark underscore LMHC for licensed mental health counselor. And my book, Body Neutrality, it's at Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. And my podcast is called The Dissenting Therapist. It's on Apple and Spotify.
Fantastic. Well, I'll include some of those links down in the description below, so that you all can visit it. And Ellie, it was great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody that was listening today, and I'll catch you on the next episode.